Welcome back to Campus Pressbox. This is episode 62. I'm Damien Bowman, along with the best basketball writer that we have, the best basketball writer in the city of Cleveland, I think, and one of the nicest guys that I know, Mr. Damon Del Rosario. Damon, how are you?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm well. This is like the Damon and Damien show, so this will be confusing for some people. But,
yeah, absolutely.
But you're the smart one here. I'm just kind of, trying to get led to water here, so I think we'll be okay.
Perfect.
If anybody listened to yesterday's episode, actually today's, which released today, Wednesday, Bert and I did not do a good job of talking about the NCAA tournament because we are just two regular guys. But Damon is here. He's a big Louisville fan. We're going to talk about their early exit, and we're actually going to focus a lot on the early exits of most of the ACC. Actually, was it 7 of 9 or 7 of 8 teams, right, with the early exit? So
I want to say it was 8 of 9.
Or 8 of 9.
Yeah.
Okay. So the last one standing is North Carolina this weekend, and we'll talk about how far we think they're going to get and what their chances are. But I was just talking to Damon before we started here, and I'm looking at his bracket, and I told him there's a lot of red here, which I think is kind of uniform across the board for everybody. I mean, I think a lot of people survived the first day, but the second day, or the second round, I guess, was just not – it just didn't really go well for anybody.
Yeah, and I felt really good about mine because normally I take a few too many chances on those 11-12s, and even though I feel like they're going to play pretty close, I pick probably 4 of them, and one of them will win, and I just kind of beat up my bracket the first day, and I felt pretty good after Thursday, Friday, and then once Saturday, Sunday hit. Saturday wasn't too bad, obviously Villanova, the major one that I had going all the way to the Final Four, getting ousted by Wisconsin, but I didn't know the bloodbath that was to come on Sunday between Louisville. I didn't even, once the Cardinals lost, I kind of took a break, and I didn't even realize until morning that Duke had lost, and then some of the teams that I picked as early outs for fairly high seeds, like Oregon. I mean, they were one that I thought was susceptible, and I really liked what Rhode Island was doing, and Rhode Island had them down 10 for most of that game and then gave that up. So, and that's kind of the way of it for those 11, 12, maybe 10 seeds, that they just battle and they show a lot of spunk and they just really fight. But then in the end, that higher seed gets them, and it just, everything kind of went bad that second part of the weekend for me.
Yeah, but I'm looking here. I mean, now that you mention it, 10, 11 seeds. I mean, you had some good ones. I mean, I think, I had Southern Methodist over USC, and obviously that went differently than I think all of us thought. But, St. Mary's, I'm surprised at how well they played, and Notre Dame. I had Notre Dame, but that was, it's a 2-point ball game against Princeton. Who saw that coming?
Yeah.
I actually had West Virginia beating Notre Dame, which I kind of thought was going to happen because I just think Huggins is, he just makes everything so much more difficult for everybody in the tournament. And,
right.
The kind of offense and the defense they run, especially their defense, is just so much hands-on that they're not used to that really in the ACC. Where in the Big 12, they just kind of get away with bodies all over the floor and two-handed shoves and whatever, and that's basically what West Virginia, I feel like, is under Bob Huggins.
Right, and I actually thought that Notre Dame Princeton I thought would be a good game. I didn't think it would come down to a final shot. Mm-hmm. Princeton was one that I teeter-tottered on the first day of, I went from, do I pick Princeton to upset, to having Notre Dame all the way to the Elite Eight, and there were an awful lot of those spots that I just felt that way in this tournament, that I could probably pick an upset here. It probably won't happen. So, and then suddenly that same team I had making a run, and Notre Dame's inability to handle West Virginia's pressure was one of the biggest surprises, because I see an awful lot of them in the ACC. They are usually pretty efficient offensively. They don't really seem to panic, and they just looked absolutely panicked from start to finish in that one. And every time they got close, they did something to themselves that set them back. And West Virginia did. They really battled, and they are physical. And that kind of harkens me back to the Big East a bit. It's funny, all this talk about the ACC disappointment, the Big Ten having a down year, and then now having 3 teams in the Sweet 16. And I think back to the Big East, which, Louisville fans, and I know a lot of the ACC kind of fan bases think that the ACC is this great league, and I think it is. I mean, I think it was the best league overall in the regular season. But those years in the Big East, probably from around 2008 through 2012, somewhere in that range, 2013 even.
Yep.
It was that conference to me was the best conference I've ever seen. Every style of play was available. I mean, you had the physical West Virginias, you had the zones with Syracuse, you had Louisville's different matchup defenses, you had Connecticut who could get up and down. I mean, you just had every style of play in the Big East, and they beat each other up too. So you had really every experience possible going into the tournament.
Yeah, you're 100% right, and I think, and again, I mean, this is one of the West Virginia Notre Dame is one of the Notre Dame games, one of the games that I actually wanted to watch because I thought that would be a pretty good game, and West Virginia opens up with a 10-0 lead, and they just don't stop, and we talk about how teams like get these leads, and you talk about Louisville before we started, how they had like a comfortable lead, and then they kind of like let them back in, and I just feel like West Virginia just kept their foot on the gas, and there was nothing Notre Dame could do to really stop West Virginia because, again, I feel like West Virginia, I don't know if they're the most physical team in the tournament or the team that's still left, but I feel like that they play like really aggressively every possession, and Huggins just he doesn't sub 5 at a time, but I feel like he's got like 2 guys on the bench that are just always ready to come in and be just as physical as the person that just left, and there's no break if you're the other team. Like there's no break at all.
Right. And I think there was a lot of, and not, I guess, angst about West Virginia. I know one of the things that I saw that was pointed out before the tournament for them was that I want to say that they're the only team in the bracket that only had one double-digit scorer for the season. And, so the obvious concern there is, are they going to score enough? Do they have a go-to guy? And so far it hasn't bothered them. I actually had them going out to Bucknell. That's how aggressively I got with that, was that I've seen Huggins West Virginia teams the last few years. I mean, they've had some success, some failure, and I felt like Bucknell was one of those. They're kind of one of those mid-majors that every few years seems to put together a nice team that either gets really close or knocks somebody out. And now West Virginia is making me pay the price, and they've got a really good shot of advancing. I mean, there's no reason they couldn't beat Gonzaga as well.
Yeah, let me just take a look here because I'm trying to see how far I had them going. Yeah, actually, I have them beating Gonzaga. I thought so. I think they can beat Gonzaga. I know that sounds crazy, right? Like you're probably laughing at me and giving me the finger over there, but I don't know. I just trust Gonzaga right now West Virginia more than I trust Mark Few. I have no reason why. I have no analytical or numbers or anything to base that off. I just, for whatever reason, I feel like this is their year to go to the Elite Eight, and then I think Arizona beats them.
Right, and I agree. I mean, I think because as much as I respect Gonzaga, and I'm one of the people that I feel like there have been a number of years that Gonzaga, during this successful, now what's now going on 20 years almost, they've had years that they haven't been respected. They've had years that maybe they were a little bit overhyped, and going into this year, and once they got on their undefeated run, many consider them, was it a team that was pretty much built now for a Final Four run. And I think the kind of the build up around that, and the fact that they're still Gonzaga. They're a really good team. I don't think that Mark Few will ever get there. We'll never see him pull a blue chip recruit that just goes to Gonzaga. Really, he gets some guys that have gone someplace else and then show up at Gonzaga. And I think West Virginia is the perfect type of team to, again, take this run and just dismantle it, because they are so physical. They're playing a team that, as much as Gonzaga tries to schedule up and play Power 5 conference teams, you get hit in the mouth in that type of game, and it could be sayonara. And I think, West Virginia, Arizona would be quite a matchup.
I know this is going to sound crazy. We're going to talk about maybe for a little bit the officiating, but I think that this West Virginia Gonzaga game, is all going to be about who the 3 referees are. I think that if West Virginia has their way on defense, that they'll win this game. But I think if the officials tighten this game up and make them play hands-free basketball, then I think that's how Gonzaga wins this game. And I think if that's the case, then they probably win by 15 or 20. But if they don't, I think it'll be a 1 or 2 point ball game.
Right.
So let me ask you this. Is the ACC overrated?
No, I don't think they're overrated. I just think they had a really bad run of a couple of days.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, is it really that simple? I mean,
I think so.
I know
it's one of those things that, and you know how I am. I browse Twitter all through these games. I follow probably as many possible basketball national writers as I can, and seeing the differences in opinion of, I saw many. This is the time of year where we judge a conference based off of one day, and that's what we get. The fan bases, your casual fan, and then some analysts take a conference like the Big Ten, who was down, and then suddenly pulls off a couple of upsets. Oh, the Big Ten was underrated. Well, I don't know if they were underrated. Maybe they were, but you can't take away what happened in the regular season.
Right.
And maybe they just beat each other up. I mean, we had a couple teams in the Big Ten, and that's what I was thinking about today, is that you had your Northwestern kind of come out of nowhere a little bit. You had your Minnesota, who was horrible last year, and suddenly they were a 27-win team. And that's going to draw away from the other schools. And then you had Michigan State that was down a bit. So when you get Michigan State to fall back, a couple of pegs, then the whole league looks like it's a little bit down. But at the same time, I think the ACC ultimately still is. I still think they're the best conference, and the tournament is so much about matchups. I can't say that every situation was a bad matchup, but you just don't know what's going to happen on those days where you just get that one game format and things just don't go right. Or, for a team like, I'm just looking right now at the bracket and I see a team like Virginia. Like, they're just a funny one to me. Like, they can be so good. Last year I picked Virginia to win, and they were, I want to say, 10 minutes away from going to the Final Four before squandering a 16-point lead. And, when you don't get the performance out of them, out of Louisville, out of Duke that you're expecting, it makes it suddenly look like the league was completely overrated. But those teams still had great seasons, and the league overall had a great season.
Right. And to go back what you said about matchups, I mean, we just talked about Gonzaga, but we didn't talk about the Northwestern Gonzaga game. And if those officials call that goaltending and their coach and Collins doesn't get a technical foul, I mean, that's a 4-point swing right there.
Right.
And they lose by 6. And I don't know if Gonzaga scored on the ensuing throw-in or what happened after that, but little things like that change the entire outcome of the game. And if Northwestern beats Gonzaga, then we're talking about Northwestern and West Virginia in the Sweet 16, and we're kind of like, well, what the hell happened to Gonzaga? Kind of like we're talking about all the other upsets or whatever. Like Duke. I mean, you're just talking about Duke. I mean, Duke and South Carolina. Like, who in their right mind thought Duke and South Carolina were going to, play? I mean, you actually had that matchup. I did not. But who thought that Duke was going to lose to South Carolina? I mean, everybody goes, this is easy. This is an easy one. And it wasn't, obviously.
Right, and the Duke and Duke was an interesting one because before the season started, all I heard about was how dominant Duke was going to be, how great they were going to be. They had this amazing recruiting class, which it certainly was, and then a number of those guys spent the first part of the season injured, and then it was this Duke team, as soon as they get these guys back, they're gonna just throttle everybody. Took longer than expected. When Jason Tatum came back, he certainly had some impressive outings, but then he kind of showed a little bit during the middle of the season that defense wasn't necessarily his strong suit. He definitely could put up a ton of points, and he's an offensive, sort of whiz. But then when they got everybody back and they made that ACC tournament run, it was everyone expects Duke to win this thing now because they have everybody back, and these super frosh are going to do what they're supposed to do, and Grayson Allen's going to behave, and Luke Kennard's going to dominate. And they kind of forget that Duke team spent, I don't know how many games, including back-to-back games in the ACC tournament, where they were down 12, 13 points against not only Louisville, but then North Carolina right in a row, where they were kind of getting dominated and found their way back in, which is certainly a credit to them, but they certainly weren't invincible.
Right. So from the first day, I mean, I guess if we just kind of go around the bracket here, I mean, I don't really know what's kind of the most surprising loss here. It can't be Virginia Tech and Wisconsin, right? I mean, I think maybe now we all kind of say maybe we all sort of undervalued Wisconsin, and how they play in the tournament. Obviously, Bo Ryan hasn't been there in several years, but I mean, they just keep on rolling, obviously. And they beat a Virginia Tech team that I thought, and I can't remember if they had a decent, conference tournament, but I think that was kind of one of those games where it was like 50-50 for everybody, 8-9 matchup, and it's just kind of like, all right, well, these two teams are, the Big Ten's down and the ACC's up, and nobody really knows what Virginia Tech is, and nobody really knows what Wisconsin is in these type of situations, and they were kind of like the first of the 9 to fall, right?
Right, and I got enamored with the ACC thing there because Virginia Tech is certainly not normally, it's not going to be a household name, and Wisconsin definitely got underseeded. I don't know how I just kind of glazed over that, the fact that they probably should have been maybe a 5.
Right.
I mean, they were 12-6 in the Big Ten. They ended up an 8 seed, and why that happens. It's one of those. Who knows if the committee throws that in at the last minute? But Virginia Tech was the one. That was the game I got to go to this year down in Louisville, and that team could score like crazy. They don't play a ton of defense, but I mean, when I was at the game, they hit double-figure threes. They couldn't miss anything, and I was just picturing them playing a Wisconsin team that at times is that same Wisconsin way, which is an awful lot of defense, sometimes a real methodical type of offense, and if a team starts knocking down triples on them, it's not going to be easy for them to come back, but they handle them from start to finish.
Right. What the hell happened to Virginia?
Oh, man, I mean, I didn't get to see Florida beat them that way, and that's one of those ones that's so interesting to me because Virginia, as a Louisville fan, Virginia completely has the Cardinals' number. I mean, we've beaten them one time, I think, in the last maybe 3-4 seasons, and that was on a almost last-second free throw line jumper by the worst possible choice on our team, our 6'11" center.
Right.
And, that shot goes in, and we beat Virginia for the first time in, I don't know how long, but every other time the Cardinals play Virginia, they get dominated. So anyone that can beat them and then beat them by, 26 points, I want to see what happened there. But Virginia, and it's the one thing about them that I always kind of warn myself against, and I think I sort of preach with that team, is that Tony Bennett, I think, is a really good coach, but that style that he plays just keeps teams hanging around. And it's a bad way to go into the tournament because you don't want to keep people around. You want to be out ahead of not only the opponent, you want to be out ahead of any potential officiating problems or whatever it may be. Florida obviously just took it to them. But even the game before that, Virginia was struggling with UNC Wilmington.
Won by 5.
Yeah, and they won by 5. And Wilmington, I mean, to their credit, was a nice team. And the year before, they took Duke down to the wire as well. So Wilmington, and from that, Kevin Keatts moved on to NC State to take over that head coaching job. So they definitely have some credibility. But Virginia and Tony Bennett's style just is it's a type of basketball that keeps the opponent around, and when you do that, you put yourself in danger of just getting stung because you leave them with that door open.
Yeah, I think, I mean, that I don't want to say that's the most surprising loss of the weekend, but I think that if it isn't, it's pretty. Well, obviously, I think everybody would say that Louisville losing to Michigan, which we're going to talk about right now, might be a little bit more surprising. But I think the way that Florida just dominated Virginia that game is just very interesting. And you talked about Tony Bennett, and there's talk of him, and I don't think it would ever happen, but of someone like him going to a school like Indiana. But it's just kind of like he's obviously a very good coach, but like you said, his style it just seems so slow and methodical, and I have no idea how it works in a conference like the ACC, night in and night out.
Right, and that's the thing is that now maybe it would be a good fit at Indiana. I mean, they spent all those years with Bob Knight, and not that he was that methodical, but his offense was all pick and rolls and very fundamentally sound type of basketball. And perhaps I always kind of wonder, not that Virginia is, they're not certainly a mid-major or whatever maybe. That's a complete insult to them, and obviously they're also not a household, historically powerful name when it comes to college basketball. I mean, they're kind of in between, and I don't know if Tony Bennett at another school And whether that's Indiana or not, I mean, Indiana has the pedigree that you could say, okay, maybe he'd get blue chip guys there. What does his offense look like? What does his style look like with blue chip guys? Or does he end up with the same exact type of guys because that's what he recruits and that's what he likes, and they're the same type of team? I think that's always the concern when you have a guy move from a school like that, and hope that he can maybe, if he increases the level of player he gets, that the style doesn't impact it as much.
Right. All right, let's talk about it. Michigan and Louisville.
Yeah.
Is that kind of the sustained response there?
Yeah, that's what I liked. I really didn't even have my phone out. Normally, during games, especially in the tournament, I try and stay as much off of social media as possible because I know all it's going to make me do is make the blood boil worse than it already was. And for much of that game, though, I was in good shape. And then I saw your tweet with, I don't know, maybe 7 minutes maybe to go of the health and safety check.
Yeah.
And you saw my response, which is not really suitable for any type of
right.
public display. But I just, it's, and I don't know why I was surprised because, like I said, they did it every single game that I watched was either, and they went one of two ways. Either the Cardinals got behind by double figures before you could blink and you had no idea why they just didn't show up for the first part of the game, and then they'd come back and win. And sometimes they'd come back and win easily. Or they'd jump out and they'd get a nice 7-8 point lead, bump that up to 14, and somewhere along the way, every single thing that was working would stop. And that's exactly what happened on Sunday. I mean, Mango Mathiang is a fifth-year senior, somehow found an offensive game. The guy never had a lick of offense for 5 years. Found an offensive game the last maybe third of the season, and he was dominating. I mean, Michigan couldn't stop him. For some reason, Coach Pitino takes him out, leaves him out for an extended period of time. He, either couldn't get through to the guys that Moritz Wagner switching onto either Deng Adel, our small forward, or Donovan Mitchell, our shooting guard, was a very bad matchup and to fight through the screens. But Michigan, to their credit, went to that time and time again. It was just the classic go to what works, and they did it. And that kid killed them. I mean, there was no stopping him. And once they got the lead, Michigan, that is, that's the other thing that we've seen is that the Cardinals just, for some reason, whether it's panicked or, just the sudden urgency really gets them thrown off, couldn't find a way to get over the top and get closer than 2 points.
Yeah, I mean, isn't it interesting? Like, I don't know, a week and a half ago, their planes on the side of a runway, and they're playing in the Big Ten tournament in their practice jerseys. Then they win the Big Ten tournament, and then they knock off Louisville after surviving against Oklahoma State.
Right.
And now they're playing Oregon, who I think is absolutely average. I can't believe they beat Rhode Island. I think Rhode Island just kind of shot themselves in the foot in that game. I think they had that game won.
Right.
And here they are with a chance to get to Elite Eight and maybe the Final Four. I mean, which is crazy. We could have Michigan and Purdue in the Elite Eight after the whole season. I mean, I said it too, how bad the Big Ten was. In the regular season. And now we've got maybe 2 or 3 or 4 teams or whatever with a chance to get to the Elite Eight in the Final Four.
Yeah, well, I mean, Wisconsin definitely has a great shot against Florida to get there.
Right.
And then if you end up with Michigan and Purdue, and you're going to guarantee one in the Final Four, suddenly that Big Ten season looks like, it looks amazing compared to what the end of the regular season looked like. And I actually think Michigan is in real good shape against Oregon. I don't know if I call them absolutely average to the level that you do. I mean, I didn't trust them coming in. I didn't even trust them against Iona necessarily. I definitely didn't trust them against Rhode Island. And without Chris Boucher, and this might be the first time that really bites them. I know he's kind of a skinny kid, but he certainly was an interior player at 6'10", could block some shots. It could be another one where Wagner goes off because there's not the manpower up front for Oregon. Granted, they definitely have a lot of offensive weapons, and they'll put Michigan's defense to the test. But Michigan likes to play high-scoring games too.
Right. Yeah. I look, obviously this is East Coast bias, and I never see Oregon, and I never see Arizona. And I don't watch as much basketball as you do because I'm officiating basketball during the season, so I don't watch. But if you had told me that it was going to be Oregon and Michigan, and that Michigan had in my opinion, a significantly good chance to win and get to the Elite Eight or Final Four, I would have laughed at you. Just based off of everything I saw in the Big Ten this year. I mean, I probably watch 1 or 2 Big Ten games a week because I know the few of the officials there. But I mean, I don't see Oregon at all year. I couldn't even tell you anything about Oregon. I didn't even know what color their uniforms were until last week. And they had that highlighter yellow on or whatever that nonsense is they wear. So I don't know. I mean, we can talk about Purdue and Kansas. I have no idea how that game's going to be. I told Bird yesterday I kind of feel like this is the stage where Bill Self takes his $125,000 bonus and exits. I don't know if it's going to be on Friday, if it's going to be on Sunday, or I guess Thursday or Saturday. But I kind of feel like this is where they kind of look average. But in the first 2 games, obviously, they've looked very good. They beat the crap out of UC Davis, and they absolutely manhandled Michigan State, which you know how much of an Izzo guy I am. I mean, lock them into the Sweet 16 and nothing,
Yeah, and I think it's surprising to me only because, and I mentioned that in the piece that I wrote for this morning, was that Kansas, they're one of those teams that every couple of years it's when are they getting knocked out? How soon are they getting knocked out? And because they have a lot of experience in the backcourt with Frank Mason, with Devontae Graham, I think that is kind of what's steadying them. They obviously have a lot of talent. The front court is where they suffer sometimes. And I've got a buddy of mine who lives out in Kansas. He grew up a Kansas fan, and he'll pop me a message every once in a while before the tournament. He was concerned because he just said teams eat their lunch inside. He's like, that's what happens. And it hasn't happened yet. I thought Michigan State might do a little bit more of that, and they were able to hold down the fort. But Caleb Swanigan for Purdue, I mean, that might be, if anybody is going to do that, it's going to be him. The guy's been absolutely dominating, and if they can't handle him inside, I guess it'll be dependent on whether the Purdue guards can offset what Kansas's backcourt is doing, because Kansas is in real good shape there, and they're playing well, and they definitely feel like they're a team that has taken to heart the fact that people question them when they're a high seed and expect them to go out. So I think the talent depth is on Kansas' side, but Swanigan is just a beast, and he may be the difference in that game.
Did you see the North Carolina Arkansas game?
I saw the vast majority of that, and especially the end.
Oh my God. Sure, we can talk about it. It's fine. I mean that play, the play, right? Is that what we're talking about?
The
here?
Joel Berry slamming into Moses.
Whatever,
Kingsley.
it's something, right? So it's funny, as we record this, I just had dinner with one of my friends who referees in the Big Ten, and he worked his first tournament game this year, NCAA tournament game, and he's still working, so NIT and CIT or whatever. And we talked about that play. Actually, he hadn't seen the play, and I showed it to him, and he goes, "Oh my God!" Like that's the first thing he said. And I go, "Yeah," and he says, "Nothing," and I go, "Nothing," and it's funny because obviously I don't want to throw anybody under the bus here, but if my memory is correct, that's the game that had the 2 Big Ten guys on it.
Okay.
Bo and Lamont, I believe, were on that game. But that play was ridiculous. I mean, obviously, but and that's the game that also had the shot that went out of bounds that they couldn't tell if it tipped anybody, like the video.
Yes.
Right, that play. So, yeah, right, you can only go to the monitor so many times, and if the monitor doesn't help you, it doesn't help you. But that play where that kid comes running down the lane, first of all, I thought it was a block. I mean, we can talk about whatever you want, but I think all the contact was in the shoulder. But to not have anything on that play, and then that kid just throws the ball up and it goes in, goes through the basket, it's just like, that's just unbelievable to me, But other than that play, and I guess what did you think about that play?
Well, I got confused by it because I thought that. And I was watching that one in particular on my phone, so the sound, I might even have had the sound down. I thought the whistle blew. I couldn't tell if he traveled after slamming into him and threw that up.
He definitely did. He definitely traveled after he slammed into him.
I'm like, I don't know what's happening. So I thought the whistle blew, and then when it was still live, I think I was as shocked as like the Arkansas guys. Everyone was looking for something to be called there. And I think you're right. I do think it was also a block. I think it looked so aggressive.
Violent, right. The contact was so violent.
Everyone thinks it's a charge because he runs into him and he knocks over a big guy. But Yeah, I think it was probably a block. But the fact that nothing happened at all and it just got turned into a mess was what was just so shocking about the whole thing. And Arkansas, though, they absolutely seemed to panic. Right, the last 5 minutes.
Oh, absolutely, was ridiculous.
They were trying to salt away the clock with like 5 minutes to go, and they're standing at half court. I'm like, you have to. I mean, you've been winning by 10 points this game. You have to run offense, and you can't just salt this. Yeah, you can't take a knee. This isn't football. You're not going to be able to just run the clock out. And they went to that. And even when they got behind, they were running offense that was, we're going to stand out here at the top
for 15 seconds.
Hope that we find something. And they literally weren't running a set. And I'm like, how do you do that? But again, we talked about it. It's kind of a theme. And I think it's a college basketball theme now because of a lot of the inexperience is that teams, when they do get hit in the mouth like that, when they've had a lead and then they give it up, they panic. And and even coaches, it seems like either the coaches can't get through to these kids or they lose their mind too because the guys just don't know how to recover. Teams forget to run what was working for them. They almost forget the sets that have worked for them all season, and they panic and they give it up and they can't get back in.
So that's interesting you said that because that actually was going to be exactly what I said. I think that, and I don't know, you probably didn't see this or you probably don't know anything about it, but Arkansas and Kentucky basically went at it in the SEC tournament. Like one Arkansas kid got thrown out and another one got like a technical foul, and there was like an intentional or flagrant one, I'm sorry, and it was just like all kind of shenanigans. And I saw this, and some, I don't know who it was, tweeted this, and they said, there's no way that Arkansas survives in the tournament. And of course they go out and they beat Seton Hall, which, by 6 or whatever, so that's 8-9 matchups or whatever. And, you see them against UNC and you go, this isn't going to be even close because North Carolina's just going to, just have their way with them.
Yeah. And
obviously that didn't happen. But like you said, that play happens, and then they're down. And then I think, and I can't think of the guy, Mike Anderson, is that the coach's name?
Yeah.
I can't think of his name. Yeah. And I just feel like he's just, it's kind of like, when something happens and you've never seen it before, you don't know what to do. You know what I mean? Like you're up and then you're down, and then you're like, okay, now what do I do? And I feel like, again, they held the ball for 15 and 20 and 25 seconds or whatever on several possessions in a row. And I'm just like, you have to play basketball here. Like, you have to score baskets. Like, go to the hole. And they just, like you said, they stood there for forever. And they basically they crapped themselves. I feel like they crapped themselves, and they probably still don't understand how they lost this game.
Right. I mean, and it's funny you mentioned, and I saw some of that Kentucky-Arkansas SEC tournament thing, but then I know when Arkansas played Seton Hall, they had the controversial flagrant foul at the end of that one.
Oh, right. I don't remember I remember hearing about it. I haven't seen it, but I remember that was like the big thing on day one, right?
Yeah, that was the big thing. And it was funny, though, because Seton Hall was already trailing, and they had been trailing for most of it. And yes, it was a one-possession game at the time that it happened, and it definitely was not a flagrant foul. It looked bad because the player went sprawling because of his feet getting tangled up. It was your standard, it's the end of the game that we have to foul. He happens to put two hands in the guy's back, and the guy flops all over the place and becomes a flagrant foul and ends the game effectively. But I know I saw an awful lot of Twitter response that, just kind of saying how funny it was that Arkansas was in such agreement with the flagrant foul after what happened in the SEC tournament.
Oh, my goodness.
So that's it's just funny how that kind of stuff comes back around.
Yeah. So you said you did not see the Arkansas-Kentucky nonsense?
I didn't see all the flagrant foul stuff or the technical foul stuff. I saw some of the game, but then missed that part.
Yeah, I mean, that was near the end, and the one kid gets, I think he either got a flagrant two. I mean, it was, Damon, this kid from Kentucky is driving to the lane, and this Arkansas guy, their big guy, if you said the name, I might know it, but probably not. He has his hand straight up, but he is literally running full speed at this kid as he's trying to go to the basket, and his elbow just whacks him right in the forehead.
Okay,
like ridiculous. And he is the one that they had given a technical foul to maybe 3 minutes earlier.
Okay,
and it's just like, it's just like, you're not going to do this, and it's funny because Doug Shows, who was a referee, who's been around for 1,000 years, goes over to Mike and tells him that Mike Anderson, the Arkansas coach, and says, "This is a flagrant 2, and this player's gone." And Mike stands there. He's like, you can read his lips. He's like, he's just standing there with his arms up. And I'm like, dude, are you not looking at the same arena video that the rest of us are looking at? It's not. It wasn't even close. Ugh. It wasn't even close. And then after the play, there's another kid on the team, number 10, whoever that is, and they're trying to separate the kids, and they're trying to get them back to the bench so they can go look at the video. And he's yelling across the floor, talking crap to the Kentucky players. Ugh. By the way, they're down by 15 at this point,
right?
So they don't even care. They're just here to wreak havoc against everybody. They don't even care. They don't understand how bad they look, And I just kind of feel like we talk about this at every level. The players and the fans are a reflection of the coach, and I think that Anderson didn't do his team or his players or his university any good in that situation.
Right.
So, but yeah, it's very interesting how those, like you said, those flagrant fouls or those types of situations come back around. So, what else? What am I missing here? What other team am I missing here?
As far as going out early?
Yeah.
Villanova was the other one and we kind of just touched on it. I think between Nova, Duke, and Louisville, those were the three biggest who, as far as seed line goes.
And we talked about Notre Dame. We talked about that.
Notre Dame. And like I said, Villanova, although Villanova struggled the night before for a good portion of the Mount St. Mary's game, or a couple nights before. And not that I always take the struggle against a lower seed that seriously, but most of the time when a top seed is good, they absolutely just throttle that 16 seed. I think of some of the great teams from back in the 80s, 90s. I think of the UNLVs who were absolutely relentless and put up 40, 50-point wins on some of these one seeds. Pitino's teams when he was at Kentucky would always beat the 16 seed by 50. They just would have no mercy on them. And so when Villanova goes out and struggles against Mount St. Mary's, and I think it's kind of an interesting point, and I know I'm not the only one, but I know I'm in the minority when it comes to Jay Wright. Not that I think he's not a good coach. I think last year's tournament, though, the win somehow elevated him to this just deity status, and I don't quite think he's
not
what
there.
That is. And he's another one whose style I've never liked, and they score a lot and it's fun, but going back to even the kind of the years with Mike Nardi and some of those guys where they'd have basically a 4-man backcourt with Kyle Lowry, and they would literally be a 4-man backcourt with maybe sort of a power forward, and it's the kind of style, and they were similar to that this year where it's mainly guards, mainly small forwards. Not that I know position basketball's kind of gone out the window a bit, but when you're 6'6" and you're playing 6'9", 6'10" kids, a lot of times that's going to be a struggle, and Villanova does that to themselves, and I think that's kind of Jay Wright's thing, and that's why I never have really trusted them. And this year, after last year's tournament win, I'm like, oh yeah, they kind of have a little bit of moxie, they've got some veteran leadership, and yeah, sure enough, Wisconsin, in their typical fashion, is able to take it to somebody that doesn't expect it.
Let me ask you this: did you did you think that they had a really good chance of repeating?
Not to repeat, no. I did have them in the Final Four. I thought it would end there. I know that's awfully close, but I figured they'd get beaten at some point. I just thought it would be deeper in the tournament because they were good, and they've got kids like Chris Jenkins, Josh Hart, who had been around, and Jalen Brunson's really good. I just thought that they would get ousted eventually, but it would be deep into the tournament.
It's interesting. I'm actually I'm looking at your bracket, at my bracket, and just at the national championship. You and I both have the same two teams in there.
I know.
Which is interesting because obviously we did not talk about any of this before we did our brackets, but and I watch very little basketball, and obviously, my bracket, that whole region for me is done, but I had Villanova and Duke, meeting, and then West Virginia, Arizona, UNC, Kentucky, and then Louisville, Kansas. It's just basically 1-2, 1-2, 2-4, 1-2 the whole way, and then now, nobody's got anything even close to that. So let me ask you this right now. Now that we talked about Jay Wright, and we talked about Huggins, and we talked about Bennett and all these other guys, in your opinion, humble opinion, of course, who's the best coach in college basketball?
Oh gosh. I'm always
Go ahead.
I'm always partial to my guy. I mean, I really, in all honesty, I do really think Rick Pitino. I mean, if he's not one, he's right up there. I mean, I think there's some young guys who are. I mean, I really respect Sean Miller. I think he's a really good coach. I don't quite think he has the pedigree yet to be given that title, just because he hasn't won, which I kind of hate. I mean, you're not going to be called the best coach though until you win something. I definitely think Bill Self, again, he could be a 1A. I mean, I think he's one of those guys that, even though maybe as much success, there's not as many titles as we would like to see. I mean, I think those guys are right up there. I feel like I'm forgetting somebody. I do think Mark Few's a really good one. I just don't think until if he decides to step away from Gonzaga at any point and take on a big time job, that he'll ever, unless he can get Gonzaga to win it, then he'd probably be considered the best coach of all time.
So it's interesting. I don't mean to cut you off here. I'm sorry, but I just want to say, I was talking to Bird a little bit about this, and we were talking about Gonzaga, and I said, to me, Few is the basketball version of Chris Peterson, who was at Boise forever, and then goes to Washington, and then obviously gets them into the playoff his second year.
Right.
One of those guys who's, I'm not going to leave, I'm going to stay, which is, obviously it's basketball, so it's a little different than football, but these big time jobs don't come around that often. And it's just very interesting how it seems like their path is kind of very similar. How they, Peterson got to the BCS a few times and at Boise, and Few's obviously been very deep in the tournament and can't break through. And I think maybe one of these times, maybe if he went somewhere else, got better players. But like you said, he's probably getting the players he wants anyway. I mean, Gonzaga is a national brand at this point, so I don't know what kind of players he wants that he can't necessarily get unless they're going to, Kentucky or Duke or North Carolina at this point. But you kind of have to think his program's probably, in the top 10 of all programs. So, if he shows up at your gym and says, "Hey, I want you to play for me," it's pretty hard to say no, right?
Right, except for that. And I think you mentioned, I think that's a great comparison with Peterson. The funny thing, though, that I think about Few, and it's not his fault, I just think it's really strange that every year, and I know a lot of big jobs don't always come up, but there have been some in the recent years, and Mark Few's name never seems to get mentioned. I don't know if he intentionally put out a statement out there that not to ask him, but it never seems like his name comes up. I mean, even Indiana, that's a school that has a ton of history, a ton of pedigree, and I didn't hear his name come up for Indiana. And I just think with the player, as far as the players go at Gonzaga, I think he probably, he could get guys who are in the top 40, but I don't think, and not that you're always going to get those blue chips, but I don't think he's ever going to get a kid who's in the top 10. Gonzaga, as much as they're a program that's been excellent for 20 years now, I think kids ultimately still, even though some of the history and pedigree and sort of pageantry of all the basketball going back to the 50s and 40s or whatever it may be, the name on the front still seems to matter in college. And I don't know if the Gonzaga name brings in top 10 kid or top 20 kid. It might bring in top 40 kid, but if he only gets one of those, the rest of the guys are nice players that maybe some other schools just didn't identify or whatever it may be, and that gets him to the Sweet 16, maybe it gets him to the Elite 8. It doesn't get him over the top.
How about Greg Marshall?
I do love Greg Marshall. I despite whatever shenanigans his wife was doing this weekend.
Did you see that?
I didn't really get to see what happened until afterwards, but apparently she was insulting every Kentucky player. She was shouting things and she was drunk. I'm like, I don't know why that's got to happen, but yeah, I do like Greg Marshall. Hopefully that doesn't hold him back from a big job if they're concerned about his wife showing up and throwing a fit.
You think? Let me ask you this about Sean Miller. Just throwing this out there. Question. You think he's the kind of guy that would work at Indiana? Okay, the first question is Indiana a better job than Arizona?
Now I don't believe so, no. I think Arizona's a better job. A better job.
So then I guess you basically answer my next question. The chances are slim and none that he would leave a job like Arizona for Indiana at this point in his career.
I would think so. I think he'd stay. There's no reason to leave Arizona. It's a team that's won. It's a school that's won title. A title. It's a school that's been to Final Fours, and it's in a conference that he can win
easily,
pretty consistently.
I'll say it easily,
and he can get talent there. He's going to get blue chip talent. He gets it. I mean, that team he's got right now is loaded with blue chip talent. So, I mean, he can get the kids to come there. I mean, heck, he's had at least I think he's had 2 now that were blue chippers that decided to go overseas and play before they ever got there. So he's kind of lost out, but he can definitely get kids, and there would be no reason to leave Arizona. I heard his brother's name with Indiana. So if Archie decides to go, I think that would be a good hire.
Who else? I mean, it's I don't want to say I think they're the person they're waiting for is still playing in the tournament right now, but if you had to give me 4 names right now, if you had to bet $1 million on any of these 4 names, that would be the next coach of Indiana. And I know this isn't something we talked about before, but organically we're here somehow. What are the kind of names that you would think could end up at a school like Indiana right now?
Well, I mean, I think Greg Marshall would be one. If they're not considering him, I think they should. Definitely, I think Archie Miller is another one that's out there. If they're going to consider another and I don't really want to throw the pro names out there because I've seen those, and none of the guys in the pros like the Donovans or the Stevens are leaving to go to Indiana. Not right now, at least. They might in a couple of years. Chris Mack from Xavier, maybe.
Yeah,
but
I like that too.
I mean, I think he definitely, his teams compete. And Xavier, as much as I like Xavier, and they're sort of the original Gonzaga with not quite as deep of a tournament run. It's not a place he's ever probably gonna get national title caliber talent to. And I don't know if I had to think of another name. I'm trying to think of one of the other big young names out there. I'm looking at this bracket to see if there's someone who I'm missing.
Right, that's what I'm kind of doing too here.
Gosh, well, and not that he's gonna leave. And this wouldn't even be a rumor, but I guess the one thing, and not that there's anything wrong with Notre Dame, I don't know why I never hear Mike Bray's name when big time jobs come up. Only because Notre Dame doesn't ever feel like a place that, like from a basketball standpoint, is ever going to get over the top. Like it's more of a football driven school, and their last successes in the tournament were back in the 70s. Bray is a really good coach that I think gets overlooked when it comes to naming big names for jobs. I think he's a really good coach, and no, I don't think he'd jump from the one Indiana school to the other one, but who knows?
This is dumb, but no chance Huggins ever goes there, right? I mean, they would never take him.
No, and I don't know why. I mean, again, it's kind of one of those things. I mean, he's been at Cincinnati, he's been at West Virginia. I mean, I don't know why he would, but I mean, I don't know why they wouldn't. I mean, unless it just reminds them too much of Bob Knight.
Right. Okay, so now that all of your teams are, I guess you still have Arizona here. Give me your revamped Final Four.
Revamped Final Four.
Revamped. Based on who's in there now.
UCLA's still in there, and I had them in the Final Four. Arizona. Okay. So my 2 Pac-10 teams are still in there.
Which is crazy.
Yeah. So those 2, I think they still both get there. In the East, which is the most banged up bracket, I mean, I think Wisconsin comes out of there. Looking at that, I mean, I think Wisconsin comes out of that one, and they'll play Arizona, and Arizona will have nightmares of 2015 when they beat them then. And
well, let me ask you this while we're in the East: Baylor and South Carolina. I mean, do you think anybody? I'm sure somebody picked this matchup, but like, who picks this matchup? Baylor and South Carolina. I mean, I don't think. Again, if you gave me $1 million, do I think I could ever pick this matchup in the Sweet 16? Absolutely not. I mean, that's got to be one of the craziest 3-7 matchups, probably not in history, but in recent history, right? Like Sweet 16 matchups.
Right. I mean, well, especially because, I mean, they're one of those teams that under Scott Drew usually flames out. And South Carolina is just, I mean, not even normally in the tournament. And
right. That's
part of the reason I thought, I mean, I did pick them to win one game, but I just thought that their lack of experience. But yeah, that's a crazy one to talk about different coaching methods or styles across from each other. And that one, you got Scott Drew, the twerpy looking sort of not sure what his tactics are to recruit down at Baylor. And then you got Frank Martin over on the other side who looks like he'd rip Scott Drew in half and throw him.
The angriest guy in college basketball is what I call Frank Martin.
Yeah, so I mean that's I think just watching those 2, they should just have cameras on those 2 at points in the game because that's going to be an interesting piece.
So I think the moral of the story for your bracket here is, although I guess you're 50-50 here, is, maybe don't pick two conferences to only be in the Final Four.
Yeah. Well, I mean, who did I have? I had Villanova, so I had Big East there, and I had Louisville.
Oh yeah, that's right. I'm sorry. That's right.
Despite Louisville,
I'm still stuck that
rivals
Louisville's in the Big East. Yeah. All right. So who do you have coming out of the Midwest?
I think with what's left, I mean, I'm going to have to finally go chalk and go Kansas. I think they can escape this now that it's sort of beat up a little bit. And I know Purdue's kind of expected. I had Iowa State getting to them and then them beating their conference rival and then Louisville beating them. But I do like Kansas' experience, and that would set up a nice UCLA Kansas. We might end up with a Pac-10. We might end up with Pac-10, Pac-12 championship there with UCLA and Arizona, which would be a fun game. But sometimes those conference on conference national title games feel a little bit strange.
Right. And I know we didn't talk about this, but LaVar Ball's got to just stop talking, right?
Well, it's
time, right? Let's just stop.
It is time. It's not going to happen. I mean, he's found his audience. I mean, right before this, I saw a video online of a video game simulation of LaVar Ball playing Michael Jordan one-on-one.
Oh my God! So LaVar Ball, that's the dad,
LaVar
right?
Ball, and
oh my God!
And the simulation had him losing, but he actually scored 3 points on Michael Jordan. So, I mean, the legend is building of what this guy's abilities are, and for what he says, I mean, he pretty much, the sky is the limit.
I mean, he is the star of the tournament. He's the star of March.
Yeah.
I mean, his stardom. It's gonna sound crazy here. It's getting up there with Trump in the election. Like, it's literally like they just keep feeding this guy, and he just doesn't stop.
Yeah. I mean, I know partway through the season when I started seeing his name, I'm like, oh, he must be another one of the brothers. I mean, you got LaMelo Ball out there, you got Lonzo. I'm like, oh, LaVar must just be another one of his brothers who's playing. No, and then I find out it's his dad, and every time you turn around, this guy's coming up with something new to insult somebody or make some claim about his kids.
That interview, I don't know if you saw it. It's kind of when I first saw it. For whatever reason, I turned on Colin Cowherd last week, and that interview with Colin Cowherd, I think that's kind of what set all this off.
Right.
Last week or the week before, whenever that was, and I watched this. And I was like, I can't be the only person in America watching this. And I like you, open up the Twitter, and in the middle of the afternoon, I mean, this is 1:30 in the afternoon on a Thursday or a Wednesday or whatever this was, and everybody is just going on for hours about this guy on Twitter. And I go, what? And I'm thinking, like, all right, this will be over in like a week. And the next thing I know, he wants $1 billion for his brand, and now he's making fun of LeBron and his kids. And you saying he's doing like a simulated game with Michael Jordan, but he's happy because he scored 3 points, but still probably got his butt kicked. Like, who is this guy?
Well, and we're going to get lots more of him because, I mean, Lonzo's brothers are on their way. So when he's got LaMelo, who doesn't cross half court to play defense, he just hangs out,
which is amazing.
Yeah, I wanted to throw up when I saw that video. So we have lots more of LaVar to come, depending on what his kids' teams do over the next couple of years.
Goodness. Oh my goodness! I mean, obviously, I hope his kids are not a reflection of him. But I mean, if this guy goes away and I don't see him for another 10 years, it won't be soon enough. You know what I mean? Like I'm already
agreed.
I'm already over this guy. I'm already done. All right, so Arizona, UCLA, Kansas,
Wisconsin,
and Wisconsin. All right, that's pretty interesting. I could take that in Glendale. That would be a home game for Arizona.
Yeah, and hopefully this time because last time they played Wisconsin, I think it was the Elite Eight there in 15. I thought that Arizona team was better than that Wisconsin team at that time. Hopefully they can exercise some of those demons if they hit that matchup.
Was that the year that we had the Kentucky, West Virginia, Notre Dame, somebody else regional here in Cleveland?
Yes. That was when West Virginia lost by about 70 to Kentucky.
Yeah.
Notre Dame had Kentucky dead to rights down the stretch and gave that one back. That was the 38 and 1 or whatever it may be for Kentucky. Right. And then Wisconsin, then Frank the Tank was unstoppable in that Final Four semifinal.
Okay, I want to ask you about one more thing, and then I'm going to let you go. we were talking about this a little bit earlier in our super secret Slack. Oklahoma State will interview alumni, Doug Gottlieb for their head coaching position. Why don't you tell me where you are on this, the Doug Gottlieb railroad tracks or whatever, and I'll kind of tell you where I'm at.
I don't get why they would want him to take over, I guess, a Power 5 school. I mean, other than the fact that he played there. As far as I'm aware, and I haven't looked that deep into it, he hasn't coached at any level that I could see. Maybe his kids, I don't know. But I just don't. I mean, he might be a good coach. I like Doug Gottlieb. I think he's a pretty good analyst. I disagree with him. Sometimes I agree with him, but I don't think he would come in and take over a Power 5 school, and that would be a good idea.
Right. So he's never coached anywhere. He played professional basketball somewhere in like Europe or whatever. Has never coached, as you said, to any level of significance. AAU and CYO don't count. But as I told Seth and Bob and whoever else was in there today, I guess maybe it depends on what their expectations are. At Oklahoma State, I think if they just want to be, this is me being stupid again, not knowing anything about basketball, average, and they want to get better players and they want a little bit more marketing on it, then why not Doug Gottlieb, right? I don't think it's a good choice at all, but he might be cheap because he's alum and he might have some connections, and obviously he's around the game, and he probably has very good contacts, and he might be able to hire like a really good staff, and maybe that's kind of what they're going for. But I kind of made the the Lavin and Mullen comparison at St. John's. Like, those guys had never coached anywhere. At least I don't think, before they, after their playing careers and then they started coaching. I know it is not Power 5, so it's not, a one-to-one comparison, but I think it's pretty similar in that regard. And like you, I find it hard to believe that they can't find anybody else at a Power 5 school that wants to coach. But I wonder, again, what their expectations are and what their desires are.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess I would be surprised because while Oklahoma State's not a superpower, I mean, they certainly have had successes in the past. I was surprised that Brad Underwood left after a season and went to Illinois, because I would rather be at Oklahoma State personally as a coach than I would at Illinois. But
absolutely,
I don't know if they think that Gottlieb, because of the fact that he played there, if that's going to draw some kind of talent. I mean, it hasn't been all that long ago that they got a couple high-level recruits. I mean, they had LeBrian Nash a couple seasons ago. They get the occasional big name, and I don't know if that's what they think, that because Doug Gottlieb's a face, he's a name, he played there, that kids on the recruiting circuit they're gonna flock to that. But I can't imagine that his name's going to hold a whole lot of weight when it comes to recruiting right away, at least. I mean, unless he, like I said, something happens in his first season, he happens to have a 25-win year and makes a little run in the tournament, and then suddenly everyone's saying how fun he is to play for. Otherwise, I don't know exactly what the thought process is. I mean, there are guys out there who I think would take that Oklahoma State job that would be better hires right now. So,
right, yeah, and the Big 12 isn't bad in basketball, obviously.
No.
I mean, Kansas and Iowa State are good, and I mean, I guess Texas has been. What the hell's going on with Texas? Are they even playing basketball? Do they play this year?
Yeah, they tried to. Well, that's the crazy thing too, is that because of the fact that they were so bad this year. I mean, Shaka Smart's one of my favorite young coaches, and
right.
They looked so bad this year. Now they have a recruiting class on the way that's supposed to kind of turn them around, but I feel like that was kind of, I think Shaka, when he gets the kind of kids he wants in there across the board, sort of flushes that roster out, then, I mean, I think they're going to be fine. Hopefully they give him the time that he needs, because I think Shaka's a really good coach and I love his style. But yeah, this year they were non-existent. They were, a losing record and just not a good year for them. But overall, the Big 12, with West Virginia and with Iowa State, the Kansas States. Kansas State, they're competitive here and there. They made the tournament this year. There's
TCU looked really good last night in the NIT. I think they lost, but I think they looked really good. Who'd they play? Weber State, maybe?
Oh, I didn't get to see that.
Yeah, I can't remember who they played, but they looked pretty good. I mean, they're in the quarterfinals of the NIT. I mean, it's not obviously not the tournament, but nothing to sneeze at.
No, the NIT is always that's that transition tournament when you have a team with experience. They get to the NIT, and then the next year that's when you make your little bit of a tournament run because you've got all the juniors and seniors that come back after that NIT final or NIT championship.
No, I'm interested in who they played last night. See, this is it. This is my problem. Richmond.
Okay.
And they won 86-68. So 22-15, 15-6 at home. They're not bad. You know, that league is not terrible.
No.
I mean, it certainly looked better on the whole than I guess we can say the Big Ten did. But now look at the Big Ten; they've got 3 teams, you know, in the Sweet 16.
Right.
Anything else?
No, I think we're just waiting to see what kind of other surprises are in store here at the Sweet 16. I mean, like I said, we make predictions, and I just picked another Final Four, and a couple of days I'll probably take a look at this thing, and I'll be writing some other retraction because of everyone just disappearing. I mean, well, it'd be funny if we can get a number 7 Michigan, number 8 Wisconsin.
Oh my goodness.
Maybe a number 11 Xavier, and then I guess the best we could do out of the South would be a number 4 Butler. That would be nice if we. I mean, unfortunately for everyone else, like I said, I'd probably be one of the only people watching the Final Four because just about all of the rest of America who have brackets would turn the whole thing off.
Oh my god! I mean, that would be absolutely hilarious if we got like the bottom seeds of every region to the Final Four. I mean, it would be hilarious. I think a lot of people will watch Huggins, though. I think a lot of people like Huggins. I think a lot of people still like Butler, you know. So I think obviously you'd still get the gamblers will watch. But, I mean, if you get a guy like Frank Martin or Florida in there, it's just nobody's going to watch that.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to watch any of that nonsense. Yeah.
Wow.
All right, tell everybody where they can find you, Damon.
Well, you can find me on Twitter, first of all, at DamoKnowsSports, or you can find me on CampusPressbox.com. It's Damon Del Rosario at CampusPressbox.com.
Okay, I'm Damien Bowman, DaminBowman on Twitter. Damien.Bowman at CampusPressbox.com. Notes for this show and every other episode of Campus Pressbox are at 4lights.fm/CPPX. And this episode is episode 62, so /62. Bird and I will be back next week to probably make more fun of our brackets and make ourselves look stupid trying to talk about basketball. And maybe I can get Damon and maybe Zach to come on next week as well and actually have real conversations about basketball, meaningful conversations. So, to the 2 smart guys who actually know what's going on. Okay, that's great. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Enjoy the games this weekend, and we'll talk to you next week.